Welcome, 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 everyone. You are now a part of the 2025 Catalyst webinar series. I'm Kendall Marlowe with the Kempe Center for the Prevention and Treatment of Child Abuse and Neglect. And this Catalyst webinar series is in connection with the International Call to Action to Change Child Welfare Conference. The idea here is we'd like to have discussions that push beyond the surface level solutions and into the structure and interpersonal shifts that we need for real change. And this webinar series is meant to bring together thought leaders, change makers, and advocates to explore positive and inspirational ways of finding some hope in these times that may challenge us. And to give you a brief commercial, I mentioned that conference. If you're not already signed up to be a part of it, it is the Call to Action to Change Child Welfare virtual conference. You can find that at www.ctaconference.org. Call to action. So it's www.ctaconference.org. We're happening with that October 6th to 9 this fall. So join us with that. Today, again, this is the first of the episodes of the 2025 Catalyst webinar series. And we are fortunate today to be diving into something called relational equity. What the heck is that? We're about to find out. And joining us in all that is Matt Anderson. Matt, good to see you.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks, Kendall. Glad to be here.
And Matt's going to tell us who he is, I suspect. But among other things, he's been the CEO and co-founder of the Imagination Factory. Some folks may know him from something called the Proximity Process podcast. But Matt, relational equity, relational equity.
Yes.
Matt, I went to a pretty fancy grad school, a lot of policy focus and all that good kind of stuff. And that's a term I suspect my professors would have loved. Boy, does that
Mhm.
sound high-minded. So, relational equity, Matt, I'm imagining that it was a bit of a journey for you to
Yeah.
get to that. So, start us off with where were you
Hmm.
and what happened when you thought, I've got to do something about this?
Yes. Okay. So, happy to answer that question, Kendall. And I was saying this before we jumped on. It's obviously a longer story than one moment, and maybe we can get into different parts of it. Um, okay, I'm gonna go off script real quick here, Kendall. Sometimes I do this. I'm
Go,
just seeing,
this is the problem when you have Matt Anderson on your webinar. Yeah, yeah. Go for it, Matt. What's
people
up?
that know me know I can be a rule breaker sometimes, but I'm just seeing some faces pop on here, and I would love if people want to can use the chat and just say where people are, like where you live in the world, and maybe even the organization you work for, just to give a little context as we get going.
Yeah, let's
Um,
do that. And then let me also, I should have added earlier, Matt, that
yeah.
folks can pop questions and comments
Okay.
into chat, whether you are viewing this as a part of a Zoom room or you're on what we call Attendee Hub, which is connected with the conference. There's a chat function and pop stuff, questions, comments into the chat. But yes, Matt just asked folks to pop in who they are and where you're coming from, organization and whatnot. And I am
Yeah.
seeing
Yeah.
that here as it comes in. We've got Michelle Beebe from the Kemp
Nice.
Center coming from to us from Longmont, Colorado. Brittany Kennel, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, with the, if I can pronounce this correctly, Mi'kmaq Child of Family Services of New Brunswick, a First Nation. We've got Gwen Barley from the Kemp Center. We've got Terry Lewis. We've got Aaron Hall from Denver Human Services. We've got Vivian Coe from the Florida Institute for Child Welfare. So all over North America, and we may go beyond that as those continue to stream in.
Nice.
Talk to us, Matt.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. And thank you all for being on here. And I'm excited to have this conversation and curious what resonates with people, what questions pop up in the chat. But Kendall, yeah, the sort of the origin story of relational equity. So I'll start there, and then maybe we can kind of go down some different paths of how I got to that moment, because the decision that I made after my introduction to relational equity was the culmination of a number of other events sort of leading up. But the relational equity origin story. So I was at Children's Home Society of North Carolina. I'd been there for almost 11 years at that point. I was the vice president of programs and business development, part of the executive team, and had a number of responsibilities, all of our governmental affairs and public policy and business development. I had been part of the team that launched Institute for Family. We were producing a podcast called Seen Out Loud, which maybe some folks have come across as well. And I was also responsible for our statewide foster care and adoption services. So that was sort of like that was the meat of the issue for me when I started to unpack what relational equity is all about. So I was responsible for a foster care program serving 1,200 kids a year. We were completing hundreds of adoptions per year from foster care, and I was really grappling with what should a foster care program be about. If I'm going to be responsible for this program, what can I do to make a contribution via the program that would be in service to kids and families? And what we landed on through a process, we landed on, okay, we're going to pivot from being a foster care to adoption program to being a foster care to permanency program. We're going to put our focus on reunification first. And that's a whole different story, but I just want to set the context a little bit. But that was a big change for us. And you know, maybe some people are on here that have run foster care and adoption programs, but to move from an adoption priority to a reunification priority means you have to change basically everything.
Adoption is
About-
success, though, isn't it, Matt? Don't we celebrate adoptions? Isn't that don't we have events at the courthouse every year to
we
celebrate
do.
adoptions? Is
Yeah,
that
yeah.
is that success?
I've come to believe that it's not success. So there was a moment. So who was in here? Vivian from Florida. Perhaps you were at this conference, Vivian. I don't know, but it was the Florida Coalition for Children conference a few years ago, and Corey Best gave a keynote. And at the end of his keynote, which was oh, what was the title of the keynote? Anyway, it'll come to me. But the end of the keynote, he said, "We'll know we're making progress when we stop celebrating foster care and adoption as a success." That, and I get chills right now when I say it. Stop celebrating foster care and adoption as a success. That was part of my job, was to celebrate foster care and adoption as a success. How can it be a success when it requires the legal termination of a parent's rights and permanently severing the relationship between parent and child and that child and their extended family? That's not a win. That's not a success. It's not even a necessary end to permanency for kids in foster care. We don't need adoption as the end goal to make sure kids who end up in the system get out of the system. There's many other pathways, legal and practical, that can be pursued to avoid the need for adoption anyway. So no, while in my job, yes, it was a financial success, it was a measurable success, it was a mission success, it was a community seeing us in a positive light success. It was a success on all those levels. But when I understood relational equity, when I heard Corey Best's keynote, when I met Shronda Selvanoff and Slam Anderson and a number of others that I kind of saw as my teachers, I started to really reimagine what success means. And it really changed who I am. So yeah, should I tell the relational equity kind
So
of
yeah,
origin
where did
story
that
now?
lead you? Where did that lead you, and how does
Yeah.
that end up in relational equity?
Yeah, so I was at Children's Home Society. I was in this role. I was grappling with these questions already, and we were doing some diversity, equity, inclusion work as an organization. We were sitting on a Zoom, just like this. There were 300 Children's Home Society employees gathered together on a Zoom in a workshop with Tepiak Consulting. Marisol Jimenez was running the session, and she introduced relational equity and relational equity practice. And so this was July, August of 2022. This was like my introduction to these concepts. And very simply, she defined relational equity as being in right relationship with people. So if we're in the human services business, being in right relationship with people becomes really, really important to think really deeply about what does that mean? So for me, it's like, well, which people? And my answer to myself on this Zoom was right relationship with myself and the people I serve. Okay, who do I serve? I serve kids in foster care and their families. Okay, so I need to be in right relationship with myself, kids and families in foster care. And then she went on to define relational equity practice. And so that was pretty simple definition too, but again, really complicated to go deep into this, challenging, personally challenging to go deep into what she was saying.
And you're
So the
saying with
relational,
yourself, you're saying not just with the folks you serve,
yeah, the
with
relational equity
yourself.
practice definition is a very personal process, right? So she defined it as a practice of acknowledging um, your contribution or your contribution to and benefit from systems that harm and oppress people. So relational equity practice is to acknowledge that do you contribute to and benefit from systems that harm and oppress people? So that was sort of the question that I was sitting with again on this Zoom. And I'm thinking, okay, so the child welfare system is the system that I work in. Is it harmful to people? Yes. I mean, the science is the data is pretty clear about the harm of family separation. Is this system oppressive? Yes. There's plenty of qualitative and quantitative data to that, and it's oppressive to marginalized groups of people, African American families, Native families, right? So it is harmful, it is oppressive. Do I contribute to that? Personally, do I, Matt Anderson, contribute to that? Yes, I do. Do I benefit from that? Yes, I do. I get paid a salary and benefits, and I could go on and on about the ways in which I benefit from it and the ways in which I was perpetuating and contributing to it. So here I am, I'm sitting on this Zoom thinking about, is the system harmful? Yes. Am I contributing to it? Yes. Am I benefiting from it? Yes. Am I in right relationship with the people I serve? No. How could I be in right relationship with the people I serve if what I do contributes to harm that they experience? If I'm not in right relationship with the people I serve, am I in right relationship with myself? The answer was no, because I don't, that's not what I value. That's not what I believe. That's not what I want my behaviors to reflect, but they were. So that was the oh shit moment on that Zoom because I it didn't fully go through that entire thought process on the Zoom, but 80% of it probably just like really walked myself through that and came to this place of I'm not right with myself. And that left me in a in a bit of a crisis of conscience, I guess you could say.
Is that just burnout? Did you just need a sabbatical to go, hike the mountains of North Carolina for a little bit? Were you just burnt out, or was it something deeper?
Definitely something deeper. I did need to take time, and I did eventually take a little bit of time to step away from it all. Um, but no, it wasn't burnt. I wasn't burnt out. I wasn't jaded. I didn't have compassion fatigue. Like it wasn't these kinds of things that we often experience, right? Like I was motivated and inspired. Um, but the way that I came to eventually describe it, Kendall, is that I was experiencing values fatigue. So that's what like I have a journaling practice, right? So I had lost my journaling practice and started it up in the spring of 2022. And I look back at those journal entries now, writing about how I was exhausted and overwhelmed. And so I was definitely having these kinds of feelings and experiences, but it was the tension between my behaviors and my beliefs, what I was doing as a systems leader versus what I believed was right for people. That the weight of that disconnect and that tension was a values tension. It was a values fatigue. So I saw it that way, as opposed to being burnt out or jaded or whatever else we might talk about.
So some folks might have some of those similar values, but feel, perhaps very understandably, that these kind of larger issues are beyond them, beyond their scope of influence. So does this system do harm? Is it classist? Someone might feel yes. Is it
Yeah.
racist? Someone might feel yes.
Yeah.
But they might also feel I'm a social worker. I'm doing my best every day. I'm making this system better in my own little way, case by case.
Right.
I can't solve society's larger problems. Is that a reasonable thing for them to feel? But then, whether or not you think it is, what do they do about that?
Yeah, what do you do about that? I think we all have to ask that question, right? I mean, and maybe we'll talk more about this, but one of the things that I've come to believe is that if we see systems as racist, as we see if we see systems as harmful or oppressive or not living up to the ideal that we would have for them, then the change doesn't start at the structural level of policies and practices and money. The change starts with us, right? So systems change starts with personal transformation. This was the idea of the proximity process podcast that you mentioned. So change starts with us. So if we're seeing, when I saw that what my job was doing, what my behaviors were doing was contributing to a racist, oppressive, harmful system, then I have to start with me. I have to be accountable. I have to take personal responsibility. And I think that's a pathway that we all have to choose what's the right direction for us. Um, for me, the first decision was I can stop. I can stop participating and contributing to, AKA I'll leave my job at Children's Home Society. And that was the decision that I made about probably a couple months after that Zoom session that I mentioned. And after the Zoom session, I went to Florida for the conference where Corey gave his keynote. And that was sort of like the final thing. I was like, man. And it was probably a couple weeks after that conference that I made the decision. I actually wrote in my journal, I've made the decision to leave my job. And then the next well, my boss was out of town, so I had to wait a week to tell him. But in that, a note here, Kendall, in the there was obviously after 11 years, it was a process to leave that job, and I wanted to leave well, to the extent that I could, and I think I did. But a lot of conversations leading up to me leaving, and one of them was, where I was coming from was this place of, you know, this is an issue of social justice. And the conversation with people within the organization was like, yeah, but that's not the mission of our organization. That's not our problem to solve. And I'm looking at the system saying, but this is what it is. So that's the only problem to solve. So if we're not gonna hang our hat on that's a core issue, the reason this organization exists is because of social injustice. If we're not going to try to do our part to tackle that problem, then I can't be part of that organization.
Is that enough? What happens next then? Because I can
Yeah.
imagine I have composed resignation speeches in my head for pretty much every job I've ever had, I think. And boy, I can imagine that being emotionally satisfying. But then what happens next if you've
Yeah.
chosen, I can't continue in this role that I've had? Obviously, that's not enough. So what happens next?
Yeah, no, yeah, definitely. I mean, the first decision I felt like I could make is that I could stop, right? And so that was the leave my job decision. I can stop being part of this. And then really what was next is like I need to step away from this for a little bit. I need to disconnect from all of the comforts that I found in working in the system and disconnect from actually what are the constraints that the system was putting on me that looked like comfort, felt like comfort, but it was really constrained. So let me walk away from all of that. Let me give myself some time to be separated from it. And honestly, like step one, Kendall, was I need to reconnect with who I am. So this first like post leaving process was the question that I was, or the intent that I had that I was, let me see if I can recall this on the spot. My intention was around like I need to be free to be in pursuit of who I truly am. I felt like I had lost part of who I really am in the work that I was doing. So I wanted to reconnect with who I really am. What do I really believe? What are my values? What's really important to me? How do I want to show up? What do I want to do in this work? That's about an expression of me as a human being and an expression of my and all of our mutual connection. Like we're all one, right? We're all connected. So I want to remind myself of who I am and that I'm connected to everybody else. So what I do impacts myself and everybody else. And I started to kind of like map out the different dimensions of who I am. Because to be honest, like I can be very kind of goal oriented and I can get like I love what I do, right? And so I can go all in. I was very work focused during those years, right? And so I had to reconnect with other parts of myself. Who else am I other than somebody that works in this field? What about relationship? What about community? What about spirituality? What about, my physical experience of the world? What about joy? Where's joy going to come from? Right? I became the self-appointed um, global ambassador of chocolate chip cookies. Like that's something that I did just as like joy, right? So that was the first. I mean, there are things that then followed from that in terms of, okay, how do I get back into the work? But honestly, those were the first things of like, let me disconnect and like disconnect from the system and reconnect to myself and my shared humanity.
So leaning into that internal part of the journey for a second here. First off, in chat here, Matt, you got an amen, Matt. Uh, you got an amen, Matt from Courtney Ray. Thank you for that, Courtney. And I want to encourage folks, just pop in with comments and questions. But you also got a question. Is relational equity an answer, a helpful response to moral injury? What's the relationship between relational equity? Is that a response to moral injury? I think you may have been touching on that.
Yeah. Um, my gut is that I'd love to like some more context to the question. So if whoever asked it, feel free to like add more context to that to make sure I'm understanding where the question's coming from. But I think that the answer is probably yes. Whose moral injury, though, are we talking about here? Is it my moral injury, or is it people on the other end of these systems? Is that where the moral injury is happening? Is it the sort of the collective injury to our shared humanity? I think that's sort of where I lean into more. Right? Relational equity, if we replace that with this idea of right relationship. So instead of relational equity, let's think about right relationship, being in right relationship with people, being in right relationship with myself and the people I serve. Right. So that's sort of where I go with that of what I'm doing, my behaviors in my work, my behaviors in how I live my life. um, is that in is that in service of people or is that in service of systems? Is another way to think about this. Right. And I think that became a pretty interesting frame for me to see myself and to see my work and to make just like to filter decisions about where I go next. Am I going to be doing something that's in service of systems or am I going to be doing something that's in service of people? And meaning like our shared humanity. Are we making the world a better place, really? You know? So that's how I think about that.
So where did you go next? You mentioned, you're a doer.
Yeah.
You're the kind of person I would imagine has got a to-do list for every day, for every week, at least in your head.
Right.
Where did you go next then, once you did some of that internal reconciliation and exploration?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, definitely in my head. I'm not the most organized person, so I don't have like, great organizational skills. But yeah, where I went was I gave myself some like really clear guardrails of when I would go back to work, what kinds of criteria would I use to make decisions about what kind of work am I going to work for myself? Am I going to work for another organization? If I work for another organization, what kind of organization? What like so I, the kinds of criteria, the go, no go, pro con kind of criteria that you would imagine. Did a lot of that. But I had to figure out like what the North Star would be. Like what's the vision? Like what is the ultimate sort of decision making factor that's going to drive my work? And so what that became for me was I wanted to do work that was about investing in the well-being of parents to keep families together. Right. So I didn't want to do anything that was, this was a conversation that I had in leaving Children's Home Society of like, and continue to have with people now, like, why can't you be in service of keeping families together, AKA prevention, and in the foster care world and making the foster care system better? And like, why can't you be in, but some people can. I couldn't, for a variety of reasons. So it had to be about investing in the well-being of parents to keep families together was sort of the key thing for me. Um, and that was coming together as I was in the process of developing what would become Proximity Design Studio. So that's what I ultimately decided to do next. So I started my own company called Proximity Design Studio. That North Star that I just said was sort of the mission, vision of the organization and how I would decide what kind of work to do. And what the work became then was media production and consulting around this idea of investing in parents to keep families together. And so I've done a lot of media production work throughout my career, going all the way back to 2007. So that felt like a place that I could lean into. And then just having a lot of work experience now, I felt like, I could do some consulting work that could be valuable. So that gave me freedom, financial insecurity, starting your own business, but a lot of personal freedom to make choices that felt aligned with who I am.
So proximity, what does that mean in this context?
Yeah, I think that proximity is a word that has just been sort of like maybe more like early origin story. Um, when I was in graduate school getting my master's of social work, my field placement was also my full-time job. I was working with kids aging out of foster care. And so that was like child welfare 101. My professors were Cody, Rafe, Matt, Mandy, Raylyn, Micah. Like these were my professors teaching me about the child welfare system, the kids that were aging out of my program that I was running. So I was doing an independent living program with kids that were 17. On their 18th birthday, they would age out. I didn't know anything about the system. What I was seeing as their experience was really disturbing, really concerning, really upsetting. And I thought, okay, these kids, I need them to be my teachers. I need to build genuine relationships with them. I really need to do my best to try to help them be successful, knowing that aging a kid out is a setup for failure, and we have the data to show us that. So that was proximity for me. And it even goes back, I won't tell the story, but it goes back even further. My very first job out of college, similar, working with teenagers, different population, but they need to be my teachers. I need to understand from them what I should be doing, what we should be doing, and be actually in relationship. And that's sort of where proximity comes from for me, just sort of intuitively, I think, when I started in my career. And it's always led to, for me, the right question at the time. The questions have evolved. They weren't, I look back and like, ooh, maybe that wasn't the right question. But working with kids aging out, they taught me that very simply the question needs to be, how do we prevent kids from aging out of foster care? This is not good. This is not what we should be doing. So how do we prevent that from happening? And then Cody was telling me his story one day of coming into foster care on his 11th birthday, 7 years in foster care, 17 different placements, his fear of aging out. And he told us for about an hour, he told me this whole story. And he came to the end of it and he said, my life matters and people need to know what happened to me. And then he said, we should make a movie about my life. And I thought that was a good idea. And so we did. It took 3 years, but 3 years later, we released a feature film, feature documentary called From Place to Place. And we told the story of America's foster care system through the experience of kids who age out. And that was proximity for me in the sense of like, I need to learn who I need to be from these kids that I'm working with. And then I need to listen to their stories, listen to their experiences, trust their expertise, and then take action with them. So, Cody told me his story. He shared an idea based on his expertise. And then, Cody and I pitched the director that became a business partner of mine, actually. Cody and I pitched the director she said, cool, this is a good idea. Let's make this documentary film. And, we were off to the races from there. So it's that idea, listen, trust, act, is a practice that I think is grounded in proximity.
How cool is that? Listen, trust, act. Because we've got to be in proximity with those folks. We've got to be with those folks to learn, right? And let me
Yeah.
just share, Matt, my first job in child welfare was also working with aging out youth on the
Mm,
south side of Chicago. And my greatest teachers were Dexter and Nick.
yeah.
And Nick, I'm driving down 71st Street. The state I was working in was one of the early adopters of a lot of the transition to adulthood supports. Nick, on paper, Matt, Nick had gotten every support and service you'd want. His file
Yeah.
looked beautiful.
Yeah.
And I'm driving down 71st Street 2 weeks after he emancipates out of the system at age 21. And I look off into the park off on the right, and there in the middle of the day, passed out on a stone bench, is
Yeah.
Nick.
Yeah.
It took him 2 weeks to become homeless. But we've got to be there to feel that, don't we?
Yeah, exactly. And see I saw that as a broken promise. And I think this is the realization that I think we have to have. And it's not explicit necessarily, but if we remove Nick or Dexter or Cody or whomever from their family, we've made a promise to that family that we'll do better and things will be okay. And then Cody, Nick, Dexter, Rafe, I mean, we know what happens when we age them out. That's a broken promise. It's a setup for failure. It's unacceptable that this happens and that we allow this to happen. And we have to feel that.
One
We
of the
have to feel
things,
that.
one of the shocking things that I learned about Nick's case towards the end, it was a shock to me anyway, was that he actually had a dad who was still around. And the
Okay.
agency that I worked for had done nothing whatsoever to reach out to that guy. But every
Yeah.
time that Nick ran from placement, where did we find him? On the couch in his dad's apartment.
Yep.
Every time. And I don't want to get too systemy here, but you've talked a lot about what we would call permanency and a different idea about permanency.
Yeah.
What about termination of parental rights? You know, we're taught that that's a goal in a way, in and of itself. Is that necessary? Um, are you going to want to tear that away from this system?
Hmm.
What about permanency? Talk to us.
Yeah. Yeah. I think let me say something to connect a dot here from proximity to permanency and TPR. So you asked about proximity and what does that mean? One of the other things that I've come to realize about proximity is that it's something I call the proximity problem. And this was a realization I had after I left my job. Um, the proximity problem is that this is an opportunity if any of us can do this at any point in our lives, and we can do it as an ongoing practice, which is just to audit the relationships in our lives. Who are the people closest to us, particularly in our work context, in the child welfare system work context? Who are the people that we spend our most time with, that we're in closest relationship to, that we're doing most of our work with, AKA the people that we're influencing and that are influencing us the most? And literally map out those relationships. Who are those people? What is their background? What is their perspective? What is their life experience? What is their perspective on permanency? What is their perspective on adoption and termination of parental rights? So what I'd come to realize is that I was surrounded by some really amazing people that were influencing me and I was influencing them in a way that I realized later wasn't fully aligned with what I believe. We were in the business of pursuing adoption and celebrating adoption as the success, as the gold standard outcome of the system and success on many, many metrics. That was my proximity problem. I had to break away from that and be in relationship with people that had a very different perspective on termination of parental rights, whether that be judges, attorneys, parents, adults whose parents were terminated, whose rights were terminated when they were a kid, right? That's a very, very different point of view and perspective on termination of parental rights. And I mean, it gets me really emotional thinking about it, but the depth of pain and suffering that happens as a result of a parent's rights being terminated is, again, this I think unacceptable. Because again, like we mentioned earlier, it's not necessary. In many, if not all cases, there are other pathways when kids come into the system. There are other pathways to pursue through the extended biological family and otherwise. There are other pathways to pursue that don't require adoption as the end permanency goal and termination of parental rights as a means to that end. So yeah, it's something that I've become pretty passionate about. It is, you mentioned the Proximity Process podcast. We did a series of episodes. We did 9 episodes on termination of parental rights. And each of those episodes was kind of like a thought experiment conversation. What if termination of parental rights no longer existed? What if we took it off the table? Imagine a world without termination of parental rights. What would that world look like? And what would the experience of families be? What would the experience of professionals be? What would we have to let go of? What would we have to create? Right? It kind of sends us down all these different pathways. And one of the pathways is TPR necessary? And so, Kathleen Creamer, Vivek Sankaran, Corey Best, Shonda Selvanoff, Molly Warren, these are the guests that we did episodes with. So kind of a cool set of conversations to dig into. And we're in the process of rebooting the Proximity Process later this year as a limited series called A World Without Termination of Parental Rights. So we're going to go much, much deeper into this question of imagine if, what if we had this world? What would it take? Why would we pursue this future vision of a world without termination of parental rights? And what might it take to get there, and what might happen on the other end of it? And so I think it's one of the things that we really need to wrestle with in terms of letting go of parts of the system that are harmful.
We've got some comments that we want to address here in chat, but first, if someone's interest is piqued by your mention of that upcoming series around eliminating TPR, how would somebody find that when it happens?
Good question. So we can put some links in the chat. So the Proximity Process is the title of the podcast. We can put a link to Apple Podcast, but the Proximity Process is available everywhere you get podcasts. So you can go listen to those episodes, and then if you follow it, you'll get notified when these new episodes. It's going to be a number of months. LinkedIn is a place to follow both me and Imagination Factory, which will be the producer of the podcast. And then Imagination Factory's website too. So I could try to put all that in chat.
Cool. And I imagine you're going to be touching at some point as well on tribal customary adoptions that do not require termination of parental rights. I'm seeing Sheldon Spotted Elk has joined us here in the audience today. Some quick notes in the chat, and I want to encourage folks, keep feeding us stuff in chat. You've got a note from Tawana French, heartbreaking, and she also says we have to accept ownership that we are implicated in those stories. And then Neil Skeen says, individuals have a really hard time changing a system, but they can do it with specific practices and skills that use the system's own standards, like evidence and case planning, to make the case and create the path for reunification instead of termination of parental rights. Building that individual capacity of purpose and skill is important. And then a message from Daniel Martin, relational permanency, exclamation point.
Yeah, exactly.
Means in part In relationship with family, however defined, friends, ecology, places and things, activities, connections and important relationships, as defined by those we are in service to, not fabricated by systems. What's your perspective on relational permanency?
Yeah, I mean, I think that relationships over everything at the end of the day. Like, let's forget about the child welfare system for a second and let's just think about in our own personal lives the relationships. Like, if I were just to ask everybody, who are the two most important relationships? Who are the two most important people in your life over the course of your entire life? Who are the two most important people? And they're, I bet one of those people are part of your family, and one might be a spouse or a partner, somebody that you chose. But relationships over everything. Part of the issue with the child welfare system is that its primary function is to separate people from relationships and the relationships that matter the most. And so if we're going to do that, or when we do that, with this idea of keeping kids safe, then if we don't prioritize relational permanency over everything else, then we're completely missing the boat. And even just that little our own personal thought experiment of the relationships that are important to us, that gives us a sense of why, but also, the data is super clear too about the importance of relationships in our lives. I mean, I've done a couple different podcast episodes with Dr. Bruce Perry. That's an interesting perspective, to have. But just hearing people's stories too. The Seen Out Loud podcast that I mentioned that we did before I left Children's Home Society. I think it was the first episode we did with Slam Anderson. Like, that's an episode of Seen Out Loud to go listen to if you want to understand the importance of relational permanency, being separated from not only her mom for 18 years, but all of her siblings. And the how unnecessary that was when you hear her story, but how painful that was for her too, and how much healing she's going to have to do for the rest of her life because we didn't prioritize relational permanency. So yeah, it's critical.
And Matt, as you're talking, I'm thinking of someone else who's a good friend of many of us, Sherry Fremont with
Yeah.
Casey Family Programs, and she always said that she tried to remember to ask families, when good things happen, who's there for you? Who
Yeah.
shows up when it's time to celebrate? When something is tough, who shows up? Who's there to help you through that?
How did you
And
get your first job?
yes,
You
yes, yes,
know, like my first job was working at a scrap metal recycling yard in Pittsburgh because my stepdad got me a job.
sure. Yeah, no,
Like, yeah, those things are important.
we have a myth in America, don't we, that we pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. But and many of us have a story of how that first job was something. By God, we went out there and we got it, and our initiative and all that good kind of thing. And I think we've forgotten because with me, Matt, it was my grandpa. It
Yeah.
was my grandpa who knew somebody,
Yeah.
and who opened that door for me. So I want to encourage everybody, keep feeding us questions, comments. I've got one here, Matt, from someone who knew we were going to be doing this and sent me a question. And I think from the question, I would surmise that they are an admirer of yours. But the question is this, and you alluded to this earlier. Some of us who know you or follow you on social media know that you are on the quest to find the best chocolate chip cookie in your travels. You show up in bakeries. Your friends attempt to make their best cookies. You have a rating system. There's your evidence-based practice, right? Here's the question. What have you learned about relational equity in this cookie quest?
Interesting. Um, what have I learned? First of all, as I think about that, if if anybody has a cookie spot recommendation anywhere in the country, a bakery, a local bakery, please put it in chat. I'm always adding to the list. Back to this relationships over everything. This cookie quest has taught me about the value of connecting with people and connecting with people on just very simple, basic everyday things like a chocolate chip cookie. Um, but also that, whatever it is, whether it's a cookie or anything else, it's an opportunity to build community and to bring people together. And um, and an opportunity to find a sense of belonging with one another, a sense of joy in the relationship with one another. If we just think about cookie as food, right? Like I think we all get that, right? Like food is this amazing, like it's just so ingrained in us that food is a place to come together and find connection and belonging and, and joy and celebration and being in the process, right? The process of finding the cookie, the process of understanding like what a good cookie is and what it tastes like and who's making it. And, we're always in process, right? Um, Corey Best's keynote title in Florida that I couldn't remember 45 minutes ago was titled, "Who Am I Becoming?" Right? Like we're always in this process of asking ourselves, who am I becoming? Right? Or really, who am I? Is always being revealed to us. And there's something about this, like this quest of the world's best chocolate chip cookie is that same kind of process, right? And and I get to do it in relationship with people. And anyway,
And one of
it's
our
been fun.
folks has just chimed in. You should go to a local bakery called Bread in
Okay.
in Durango, Colorado.
Okay. I
In
like it.
Durango, Colorado, down in the southwest corner of the state. And I just want to notice something for everybody. He's mentioned this word, I think, 3 times now. I think Matt Anderson is the first social worker, if I could call you that for a second, that I've ever heard mention the word joy as an
Yeah.
essential part of our work.
Yep.
We're dealing with child abuse and neglect. We're dealing with pain and loss. Joy has a role in that, huh?
I think it has to. I think it has to. I think so Imagination Factor. I mentioned Proximity Design Studio um, was the company that I started. Well, I that was great, and it was a great vehicle for the first year or two. But I shut it down at the end of 2024, so just a couple months ago. I shut it down and have been building Imagination Factory, and that's the work now. That's the vehicle, and in some ways, it's an expression of who I am. And it has brought me a lot of joy to be able to create something from nothing. And our vision for the organization um, is a world in which we all get to live and work at the intersection of purpose, joy, and justice. So that's our vision statement. Live and work at the intersection of purpose, joy, and justice. So to make that a little bit more real, purpose is just what am I good at? What am I good at? What do I have to offer the world? Joy is what do I love to do? Even if I work in an incredibly uh, difficult system, if I work within a system that is harmful and oppressive and people are suffering, what do I love to do is joy, right? And then justice. What am I good at? What do I love to do? And then how do I bring those two things together in a way that's in service of other people? That if I can be free to live in my purpose and my joy, then can I point that in the direction of justice in a way that I get to help other people be free too, free of an oppressive system, free of the constraints that the system puts on us as professionals, right? So I think joy is really critical. We have one life to live too. We have to find, and I had lost that, right? That was the cookie search was like, okay, this is something that is just going to be fun and it's going to bring me joy and it's going to allow me to meet people and connect with people and hear people's stories. of how they build community around food, of how creating the best cookie brings them joy. They're really good at baking, right? I don't know if selling cookies is advancing justice in the world, but in some cases it is. If you go to Homeboy Industries in LA, they've got Homegirl Cafe. It's a great bakery. Like that is purpose, joy, and justice through and through in the form of a bakery.
How beautiful. You got a couple comments here. Tawana says you have to look for the joy daily to keep going.
Mhm.
And Daniel Martin says Matt has connected with many who have followed him in this quest. True story. And from it comes story, connection. I relate with him all the time about the cookies, but in doing so, connect other ways and otherwise.
Yeah.
Folks, jump in with further questions and comments. I'm also noticing, Matt, we've got a few minutes left here, but could you just once again, we've got some links in the chat,
Yeah.
but for folks who want to stay connected with you, Proximity Process Podcast, which is available wherever you get your podcasts, the Proximity Process Podcast, Imagination Factory, also through LinkedIn. What are any other ways then, anything you want to say, Matt, about how to stay connected with you?
LinkedIn is a great place. I'm pretty active there, and in some ways, Imagination Factory was born out of doing a lot of LinkedIn content after I left my job and just sharing my process and the questions that I was grappling with and what I was going through and how I was responding, how I was like whatever I was putting a lot out there and a lot of people, just a lot of DMs. This idea of values fatigue, this idea of my work is not fully aligned with my values. What I do is not fully aligned with what I believe, and I want to do something about that. I'm not sure what to do about it. I am sure what to do about it, but I'm afraid to take the next steps. I've taken the next steps, but I don't know what the next steps are. A lot of that, I mean, literally conversations weekly after I left my job with people all over the country. And so it became really clear to me that I wasn't alone in this process. I wasn't alone in these experiences. A lot of people are having them, and a lot of people are looking for community. A lot of people are looking for support. A lot of people are looking for opportunities to like really answer these questions for themselves. Imagination Factory was born out of those conversations. We're we're building what we call a community of creative disruptors, and we're running programs and experiences to help people unlock and help people find this intersection of purpose, joy, and justice, help people move from the ideas and the steps that they want to take to actually taking the action. And so we run an accelerator program that we're always offering. It's an 8-week accelerator program to help people with these questions. But we also do an annual conference, and it's coming up. I mean, if I can put that link in chat here too, but we're going to do a 2.5-day convening called Untethered in Washington, D.C., May 7th through 9th. Registration is open. It's a small group, intentionally so, but we still have spots left for the convening, and it's this community of creative disruptors coming together. And we're definitely going to have chocolate chip cookies there. There's definitely going to be a lot of relationship building and community building that's happening. It's a very different kind of conference experience, but we also get to work. We do design labs. We spend a day in design labs, and this year is going to be around termination of parental rights, guaranteed income, and enterprise building. So that would be a place to kind of dive in a little deeper with what we're up to.
And along with the cookies, another note from Neil Skeen. Clay Christensen, the management guru, had a line. What are you hiring that milkshake to do? Why do people come into his client's store to buy a milkshake? It was a way of shaping the store's strategy. So why do people buy or prefer that chocolate chip cookie? Is it about more than the cookie? Relational, perhaps.
Mhm.
And again, Matt has popped a chat into the Zoom chat here, popped a link into the Zoom chat here for Imagination Factory. Again, that was coming up in DC, Untethered 2025. Matt, to close us out perhaps here, I'd like to bring you back to that moment where you were listening to Corey Best, and
Hmm.
Corey Best asked, "Who am I becoming?" Now, a few years later, Matt Anderson, who are you becoming?
Um, it's a oddly emotional question, Kendall.
Yeah.
You caught me off guard. I'm becoming myself is the way I see it. And I'm learning about who I am, and I'm learning about what I'm here to do. I'm learning about what brings me joy. I'm learning about how I pursue and advance a more just world. Um, and I want to live a life that's an expression of who I am. And I have found a ton of joy that I didn't know existed in helping other people do the same thing. I had a call last night at, I don't know, 8 o'clock last night with somebody that's in the Imagination Factory community, and he just needed to work through some things and texted me afterwards like, "Hey, I know it was late. I appreciate you taking the time. Thank you." And my response was, "It's all good. That's what we're here for." And that's who I'm becoming, is that this is the kind of work that I find a lot of joy in, is helping others unlock too, and get untethered from these systems.
Thank you, Matt. And for all of us that would like to find Matt, you're going to find him at the intersection of purpose, joy, and justice. And Courtney Ray has suggested, hit me up if you make it down to Durango, Colorado someday. We've got some great family warriors down here. Matt, you've made an
I'd
impression
love
on a
to.
lot of people today, and we will try to stay connected. Thank you, Matt Anderson. Could we get a round of Zoom applause here from everyone? Thank yous pouring in chat. Matt Anderson, thank you. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. This was fun.
Let's continue the conversation. Let's stay in touch, everybody. There will be future episodes of the Catalyst webinar series here. And again, this is all connected to, speaking of coming together, the Call to Action to Change Child Welfare Conference that you can find at ctaconference.org. Thank you, Matt Anderson. Thank you, everyone. Let's all stay in touch, stay connected. Thank you.